Hello A2, welcome to your first mark scheme for your first formal assessment in your second year. Well done for surviving it. So let's have a quick look through the assessment. The first thing I would like to check with you is I'd like to do two things. If your stimulus is fully underlined with everything I'm just about to put on the board, please write, or on your little phone screen or whatever it is, please write, I did this in the exam. If you didn't, please can you now do this? And it shouldn't be a surprise to you what I'm going to be asking you to do. And I really hope some of you have done it, okay? So underline the method, underline the IV and the DV, if it's an IV and a DV, which it is in this case. Underline the design, underline the sample and the sample method, underline any controls. Don't worry so much about extraneous variables, just if any pop up on your ideas in your head on the way, okay? If you haven't done that, pause now, and I'd like you to go through that. If you have, you can go on and you can check your answers. If you've done it, make it clear you've done it. If you haven't done it, do it now, okay? And remember, you must do it for next time. So the method was a lab. You can randomly allocate between music and no music, and it's an artificial environment. The IV is music and without music. The DV is running speed in seconds. The design is repeated measures. They do both. The sample and the sampling method is 10 volunteers from a local gym, so local gym. So they are volunteers. Volunteer sampling controls. They mention standardising instructions, and they all wear headphones. I'm sure you could think of lots of others. Extraneous variables, type of music, preference to music, what they'd done earlier in the day, the heat, the weather, any of those things, so the temperature in the room or the temperature outside as well. Hopefully now when you go through these answers you can see why you've pretty much almost every single answer to every single question is on that one slide. Okay, so the first one, identify one type of the type of experimenting used in this study. It was A. You can randomly allocate with and without music, and it's an artificial environment, a treadmill in the psychology department. Two questions you ask yourself. If you got it wrong or if you weren't sure, these are the two questions. Can you randomly allocate? Yes and no. Is the environment artificial? Yes and no. Okay. Identify the operationalized independent variable in this study. 2 whole marks if you said running time in seconds, or time taken in seconds to run. If you just said running time and didn't mention seconds, 1 mark because you haven't operationalized it. If you said something else, no marks. Sorry. Explain why a histogram would not be an appropriate way of displaying the means shown in table 1. The first thing here is, that doesn't need that, is shown the means shown in table 1. So you must contextualise. Can you go through your answer? Can you underline where you've made a link back with music, without music, or something like that? The means of the running times. If you haven't mentioned any of that, then I'd like you to make a note that you haven't contextualised. And if in a different colour, I would like you to contextualise. Okay? So I'd automatically say no marks for that one if you haven't contextualised. But just check if you had contextualised, would you get the marks? So the data represents 2 separate conditions, with music or without music. You can also accept reference to categorical or nominal data, or if you said the data was not continuous, as long as you explained what that meant, okay, in relation to the study. So have you contextualised it? The data is not continuous because it's 2 separate conditions, therefore it has to be a different type of chart. Don't forget to contextualise, okay? Name a more appropriate graph to display the means. Suggest an x and a y axis of your choice. Bar chart was more appropriate because it's discrete data. With or without music must be one of your labels, and the mean average time in seconds must be another one of your labels. So please make sure it doesn't matter which is x and which is y. It must say with or without music, and it must say mean or average time to run a 400 metres in seconds. All of that's really important. Okay. What do the mean and standard deviations in table 1 tell us about the participants' performance with and without music? Justify your answer. So remember, I've been banging on about how to structure these. Well, this is why it's important. Okay. So one of the first things you need to tell me, and again the order doesn't matter as long as you do both of them, participants run faster with music, or you could say take less time to run, or you could have said participants run more slowly without music, or take more time to run 400 metres. But you must talk about that, and then we say we know this because the mean time is greater in condition A than condition B. If you've only said condition A and condition B throughout the whole thing, you haven't contextualised. You must make reference to with and without music. So can you highlight where you've said with and without music? If you've written condition A and condition B, can you put over the top with and without music? And again, if you haven't contextualised, then you don't get any marks. I will be looking at these again and just checking it. I'll be marking them all for you and giving feedback and just checking. So please, but I want you to do it first. So please contextualise. Okay. Performance is more consistent in condition A than condition B, or the running times are more spread out or dispersed without music, or more tightly dispersed with music. You could say either of those. It doesn't have to be exactly that one, you just have to have given that answer. We know this because the standard deviation is smaller in condition A than condition B. Smaller standard deviation, less spread out. Okay, I hope that's the right way around. Just check, whichever one's got the smaller standard deviation, that's the one that's more dispersed. Apologies. Give 3 reasons why the researcher used a related t-test in this study. So you must contextualise. Use table 2 to explain whether or not the results are significant. So again, we've done this one a lot, so hopefully, fingers crossed, you're okay with it. It was a difference between running with music and without, 1 mark. Data is interval, don't worry about ratio, as it's in seconds. Repeated measures design as they has been used because they completed both conditions with and without music. So you must have contextualised, and we talked about that. The results are not significant because the calculated value of t, 1.437, is less than the critical table value of t, which is 1.833 at a 0.05 level for a directional hypothesis where degrees of freedom is 9. So make sure you tick all those things off. If you haven't got them all, but you've got the general gist, I will allow that. 1 mark for saying it's not significant, 1 mark for telling me why. And again, I'll mark these. So if you feel like you're being a bit harsh, it's better to be harsh to remember what you need to include, and then I'll tell you if you're being a bit harsh. I'll be nice. What is meant by type 1 error? Explain why psychologists normally use the 5% level of significance in their research. So, we've been through this, and I did say, so you get 1 mark for saying type 2 error, and we've done definitions of those, and I also said I have mentioned a couple of times in class why we might use a 5% significance level. So these are 2 things you need to include, but they do only access 1 mark. When the researcher rejects the null hypothesis, when in fact accepts the null hypothesis, when in fact they should have rejected it. I think I'll be generous. I would allow you to have that. To get the mark to define type 2 errors, you just need to say that. However, can you all add in, if you haven't included this, for future answers, because the results are due to cause and effect, not a relationship this time, because it's not a relationship. So make sure that's added in. However, if you haven't got that, you can still access the 1 mark this time. I've seen questions before where type 2 errors have been 2 marks. So you need to get into the habit of talking about it like that. And then this one, and I have touched on it, so hopefully, fingers crossed, some of you remembered it, but it's the more complex stuff. If you've managed to define a type 2 error at the moment, that's all I'm going for. But can you store this in your brains for futures? The 5% level is used as it strikes a balance between the risk of a type 1 and a type 2 error. Any reference to balance between type 1 or type 2 errors, I will give you the marks. Okay? And then the final one, and hopefully you can see how throughout, and this one in particular, why it's really useful. In fact, this question was the reason that I introduced underlining the stimulus. Okay, so identify 1 extraneous variable. So you get 1 mark for an extraneous variable. For example, the type or the rhythm of the music, the equipment, if there's something wrong with it, or any environmental variables, the heat in whether it was hot, and again refer back to that first slide. Was it too hot in the room? Was the weather hot or cold? Was the equipment faulty in some way? Was the rhythm of the music different? Was the type of music, was the preference of music a problem? As the design is repeated measures, open brackets, see why I get you to underline this now, you can't really claim participant variables as it's the same person. You can't say, it might be their fitness levels, because it is the same person doing condition A with music and condition B without music. So participant and this that's me telling you that, but this bit's on the mark scheme. Participant variables only acceptable if feasibly could have changed in a week. So illness, hydration, or injury, not things like weight, fitness levels, experience with running, those kind of things. Remember, it is the same person in condition A and condition B, hence why I get you to underline the stimulus. Plus, you're already thinking about extraneous variables, so you're on top of a question as well. And then you get a mark for explaining why it's important to control for extraneous variables, and you talk about cause and effect and internal validity, because just why it would have been important to control this extraneous variable. So it does need to be directly related to the extraneous variable. So you need to tell me why the type of music needs to be the same for everybody, or the rhythm of the music needs to be the same for everybody, or the equipment needs to be the same. If you've got 2 different running machines, is one saying that 8 miles an hour is faster than the other one, for example? or environmental variables. If it's very, very hot one day and cold the next, then that could affect our running. So you do need to check that's contextualised. Again, can you underline where you've mentioned it? And how could it be controlled in this study? So make a suggestion in context to this study related to. So therefore everyone should have the same music or the same rhythm of music, or you should use the same running machine, or the temperature of the room should be the same to control for the fact that the temperature outside is different. Okay, all of that must be contextualised. This was the first ever questions that the second years ever did, so this was the first ever real exam on this specification, and I did mark it, and hopefully now a lot of the errors I saw coming up several years ago aren't going to come up in your papers, fingers crossed. Okay, so well done for surviving your first one. The last thing you need to do, I'd like you on the back or on an extra bit of paper that you took inside it, I'd like to list all the topics you got full or high marks in. I did well in this, this, this and this. Okay, then I'd like you to list all the topics that you dropped several marks. Don't be too harsh on yourself. Don't, really go for the ones where you really didn't get any marks at all. If the ones where you got some marks and it was okay, leave that as it is. Then I'd like you to pick the top 3, and they are for you to revise. So the top 3 of the ones that you drop lots of marks on, your homework is to revise those 3 topics. They will come up again in my class. They will come up again in assessments. They will potentially come up in the real exam, and you'll be cross if you don't. You'll be cross with yourselves if you haven't revised them and you haven't improved. Okay, and then finally, identify something you did well, and this could be exam technique. For example, did you remember to contextualise? Even if you didn't manage it all the time, but previously you've forgotten it every single time, then you can. Then that's good. So something you've done well, you've improved on. Is it the way you answered the mean and the standard deviation questions? I'd like you to really tell me something you thought, I didn't think I'd be able to do that, or previously in lesson I couldn't do that, and I'm really thrilled I managed to get full marks or 1 mark on that, whereas I wouldn't have got any marks at all. I'm really interested to know something you think you've done better at than previous, so please do put something down. And identify something you need to improve. So did you forget to contextualise completely? Then that's your key focus. Did you forget how to structure the mean questions? That's your focus. Just one thing that you would change and improve and do differently, and concrete how you would do it differently. So I need to contextualise, therefore I will underline in this study in every question. We do it every week in class, so you should be getting into the habit in assessments as well. Okay, but I'm really interested to know just as much what you feel you have improved on, because that's really important. Okay, well done. Thank you very much, everyone.